Yeah, thanks for sticking around. Yeah, try to do this in 30 minutes. I'll probably try to move a little fast, but feel free to interrupt and ask questions or what have you. So yeah, he said, I'm a senior solutions engineer at Signal Sciences. Signal Sciences is a web protection platform. So if you have experience with web application firewalls and you hate all the false positives and problems like that, check out Signal Sciences. And here's just some summary of career, blah, 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 and you can find me on the socials with those links, whatever. Real quick plug, I'm real proud of my wife. She's starting a dance festival in Wake Forest, so if you're into arts, check this out at wakeforestdancefestival.org, but a little plug for my wife. So. It's at Joyner Park. It's going to be an outside event, yeah, so. Cool. Yeah, so how many in here are familiar with honeypots? Cool. How many of you, and I'm going to give a real brief primer just for those that are not familiar with them, but how many of you actually deploy them in production or for research or anything? Okay, that's a contrast in numbers there. So hopefully if this talk is somewhat successful, in the end you'll want to deploy a honeypot and run honeypots. So I'll do a brief primer on that, and then I'll talk about HoneyPy, and then get into HoneyDB and some other things. So, all right. So what is a honeypot? A honeypot is really just a computer on the network that is intended to look like a legitimate production usage computer on the network, but it's not. So obviously, if anything's hitting it, it's really going to be either illegitimate, not legitimate traffic. So it's either malicious, or maybe you have something misconfigured on the network as well, and that can be useful information. So in general, there's 3 types of honeypots. There's production honeypots, so this is something you would deploy in your enterprise. And then there's research honeypots, so put it out on the internet, see what happens, doing research, collecting information. I've added a 3rd category called hobbyist honeypot, which is kind of more where I fit into. So within those types of honeypots, there's different tiers of interaction, low, medium, high. So low interaction honeypots are kind of like dumb. It could just be opening ports and listening for connections, but not really providing any interaction. Or it might be giving banners or fake logins or something like that. So those are considered low risk because you're not exposing functionality that potentially an attacker could exploit and compromise your honeypot. So obviously as you go up there, if you go to medium, you're introducing a little more emulation, more interaction to collect more information. And then when you go to high, you may actually be deploying just like a Linux box that is highly instrumented to log everything, but they're actually running commands on the Linux box itself. So there's more risk to running that. Cool. So I kind of just explained this as far as what the production honeypot is that, yeah, you can find things that are either misconfigured on your network that could help operations, or someone's trying to traverse your network. The cool thing about honeypots is the logs that you get out of them should be low volume, right? Like you shouldn't have, well, if you have a ton of hackers hitting your honeypot, you've got a bad story in your enterprise. But so you should only see hits rarely. So you're not sifting through gigs of logs to try and find bad stuff. You get one log message, it's high value because it's either someone that's malicious on your network, or again, it's something that could be misconfigured. And the idea behind this is really, you want to make your network as noisy as possible in order to impose more risk to your attacker, right? So if your network just looks different or looks off and has weird things, and they have to explore more to try to figure out how to traverse it, you're introducing more risk to them. I have this video here. This is the way I visualize it. It's from this cartoon called Masha and the Bear. It's a Russian cartoon, but I think it illustrates it well. So there's the attacker. Yeah, so basically that's it. You lay out these things in your network to make it noisy, and they're stumbling on it and coming across it. And in some cases, and they'll just pack up and leave your network, right? Because they're like, oh, I've been discovered. I don't want to burn my presence or what have you. So you're increasing the risk, but also increasing the cost to the attacker, which may make them just go somewhere else. So they might target your competitor because they're not as robust with security. So research honeypots. Like I said, put something out on the internet to see what hits it and collect information. Discover malware, botnets, CNC servers, and then just learn about attacker techniques and tools and things like that. So yeah, there's all sorts of honeypots out there for research, and they're helpful, they're good use. So I want to highlight this guy, Andrew Morris. He gave a talk at ShmooCon in 2015, I think it was. You should check out this talk. He gives a really good presentation of this topic. And he goes through his process of finding things. Of course, it's running honeypots, it's very cheap, and he kind of explains that. But what was cool about some of the stories he had is he was actually reversing malware that he got off his honeypots, and he discovered that there was actually a campaign being prepped to launch a denial of service attack against an organization because of the analysis he did on the malware, and he was able to notify that organization ahead of time before they actually got attacked, so they could defend against that. So that's Andrew Morris. Little story on that picture. So earlier this week, I was like, "Hey, can you send me some pictures of yourself?" And he sent me like crazy pictures, like multiple. This was like the most neutral one I could I put up here. And so there was another one that I was not going to put in my slides, but this is the one I did not put in my slides. So yeah, and then I was talking to him yesterday, and he's like, "Hey, what did you want those pictures for, by the way?" I was like, "You probably should have asked me ahead of time." So anyway, so the hobbyist honeypot. I kind of liken this to the guy on the beach with the metal detector going around. It can be fun to do, so deploying honeypots. So cool. All right, so I have a couple of examples. This is an example, I think it came from like a telnet brute force, where they brute force into telnet, and then they put a script on the file system and execute it. And so up the top part, and I apologize, it's kind of hard to see, but it's the shell script that's just going out to download other malware to execute and run on the system. And so it's making several attempts there, and all those different attempts are actually downloading different binaries for different architectures, because it doesn't know what it compromised. It just got a telnet. It doesn't know what architecture it is, so it's like, hey, download all the things and then execute them all. And then the bottom part is just running a file command on it to see that there's different architecture there. Again, hard to see, but I'll just describe it. So this is just doing a strings on the binary that was downloaded, so you can see it's got a bunch of user agents in there to spoof user agents. And then also a list of passwords for its brute forcing attempts and whatnot. So kind of like the thing I want to highlight here is if you're like interested in getting into malware analysis, but you don't have samples or what have you, it's actually fairly easy to stand up a honeypot and then get some samples that you can practice malware analysis on. So I'd encourage you to do that. Okay. Here's one of my favorite examples. I'm going to run this. It should display it. So basically what's happening here is someone hitting the honeypot, trying to fuzz it, and then towards the end they realize that they're on a honeypot. So it's kind of funny. It's one of my favorites. So they're just sending commands, and then here they're just sending large sets of data to try to maybe do an overflow or try to cause the process to crash. And then when it gets to the end, which is getting there, taking longer than I thought, but it's almost there. Yeah, it's taking a long time. Almost there. So there's where just about where they realized they were on a honeypot, and they send a nice message. I don't know if you can see that, but damn you effer. And then they left. So that was one of my favorite. That's always fun to see stuff like that. Cool. Okay, so HoneyPy. So HoneyPy is a low to medium interaction honeypot. It's plugged in base, so to implement various network services, TCP or UDP or what have you, and it's written in Python. So why did I create HoneyPy? So I wanted a simple honeypot that like did what I wanted it to do. There's a bunch of honeypots out there, but it never quite was extensible, or they had restrictions or what have you, and just didn't do exactly what I wanted to do. So, and then I also wanted a project to learn more Python. So I just put the two together and started writing this. So you can find the code to HoneyPy out on GitHub. This is just it's very simple to run. This is just a very uneventful demo playing here. But really, literally, once it's configured, you set the configuration file, you start it up, you hit start, and then it's up and running and launching services. All right, so I want to walk through some of the structure here, just to kind of give you a picture of how relatively easy it can be to set up. So in this folder here, this is the plugin folder. So out of the box, you get these various services, so like DNS, Echo, Elasticsearch, NTP, SMTP, HTTP, TFTP. So, and also Telnet for Unix. So you can see you can easily just set up a honeypot on the internet and run any of these services, and start collecting what happens. And the next piece here is the service config. So it's just a pretty standard configuration file. So you can specify which services you want to run, which ports you want them to run on, or what have you. And also because it's open source, people can contribute, or you can contribute, add new services, and just easily plug it right in. Another thing to highlight here is there is also these loggers. So it's not just taking the data and stuffing it to a log file that you then have to figure out how to parse or put into some other system. You can actually integrate with some other things. So, just some examples, and I'll show some examples later, is Twitter. You can post your honeypot events to Twitter. There's a Splunk plugin, Logstash, Elasticsearch. HoneyDB is another logger, which I'll talk about in a minute. You can also post messages to Slack. And which it's cool because I've had some people contribute to the project, so like posting to Telegram. Like, I don't know why you would do that, but they wanted to get notifications from their honeypot on that. So RabbitMQ as well. So, and again, this is designed to be extensible, so if you have something else you want to send log or event messages to, you can easily add it in. All right, so yeah, so HoneyPy at HoneyPyLog is the Twitter account that all my honeypots tweet to. So you could follow it, you would get a lot of messages, but it can be interesting sometimes. So that's one integration that it's doing. And then this is just an example of a Slack integration. So if you're using ChatOps, Slack stuff, you can send messages to that. And that's helpful because if in a production sense, you may have your SOC team, your operations team, or whoever else monitoring on that Slack channel, and they would all get the event and be able to react to it. Okay, so some other things to highlight out there that are on GitHub is a Docker container, because Docker, right? Everybody Dockers, so you have to have a Docker. And then also Raspberry Pi. So this is just really just a script that if you have a Raspberry Pi, you run the script, and it'll basically set everything up for you and run. And it actually, I think it pretty much actually works like not just a Raspberry Pi, but if you had like a Debian image or something like that, or you could run the same script and it'll work just fine. So with HoneyPy, what's next? Developing more plugins, enhance existing plugins, more integrations, or like I said, very happy to receive contributors on the project. So if you're interested in trying your hand in just learning Python, or Python and you want to write some cool plugins, please do so. Also, there's bugs that probably need to be fixed. So this is actually an example of one that occurred recently. So in the logger code, it's parsing the information as it comes in. And I think in this case, it's just a parsing error where it's trying to post the event message back to my website, HoneyDB, which is fronted by Cloudflare, and then it probably the host was down, so it got the Cloudflare page, and it ended up tweeting, possible attack from Cloudflare. So the trust and safety guy from Cloudflare tweeted back at me and says, hey, someone's spoofing the IPs, or you're the one that's attacking me. And I'm like, well, not really. So, so it's kind of interesting. So there's bugs that need to be fixed there. So any contributions are welcome. Okay, so moving on to HoneyDB. So HoneyDB is a website that displays a lot of the data that my honeypots are collecting. So there's charts there. You can see the session details. And there's also a feature there called threat bin. Let me go over to HoneyDB. So this is an example. This is the front page. Just shows, in aggregate the activity for the last 7 days. And my web servers I'm on really crappy cloud providers or cloud provider. So it's running a little slow. So I preloaded some of these views here. So I'm going to jump over to the host view so you can see a breakdown of the top attack hosts that my honeypots are seeing. And then you can, let's host, and then services, you can see a breakdown by services. So lately I've been getting pounded by actually a couple of servers out of the UK with TFTP. I've been notifying that company, but they don't respond, so I don't know. They keep pounding. But anyway, so you can see a breakdown of the top services that are hitting the honeypots there. Now you can drill down into those services, and of course, okay, yeah. So you can drill down into the services. So like, for example, I clicked on Telnet from the graph, and it loads up the top IPs that are hitting the Telnet service. And then if I were to click on one of these, it would take me into where you can see the details. So this is the detail page for a particular IP. So you see a breakdown of, obviously, the protocol and services if that IP was hitting multiple. But there's some cool lookup tools here with different sites. So you can, if you were doing research to see if, hey, is this an IP that's really malicious and we should be blocking or something like that, you can use these lookup tools to get more information. So, like, for example, this goes to Alien Vault's page that has more information on the IPs. But of course, when a demo, nothing comes up. So there you go. But here's the session information. So it actually tracks like all the request responses, the interaction with the honeypot. So you can dig into the details. So I brought up this example here, so you can see where they're executing. Well, you can, if you can see it, they're executing commands to download their script files to then do whatever they're trying to do. So you get pretty good visualization of that. Cool. So I'm going to jump to a couple other things. So cool thing about HoneyDB is, one thing I've added is APIs. So you can actually, via API, pull down some of this information and this thread information and use it as part of your security operations, like if you want to blacklist IPs or what have you. So there's a whole API there. And then what I'll show in a second, there's an API for a Twitter feed, a Twitter thread feed. And what that is, and I'll just bring this up. So when I started doing this, I started tweeting events from the honeypots. I realized just from searching on Twitter that there's actually a ton of other people out there that are doing the same thing. So I've created a list that aggregates all those events that other people's honeypots that are tweeting. And so this is just a view from Twitter on that. But in the API, you can actually pull down all the data on that from that feed. And then on the last API item here, HoneyPy sensor. So if you want to run your own HoneyPy sensor, you can actually do that. You can register on the site by signing in via GitHub or Twitter and get an API key, and you can stand up a HoneyPy instance and just start feeding data to contribute back to HoneyDB. And there's this threat bin. Actually, let me log in for this. So threat bin is a feature where if you're, as you're browsing the honeypot information in HoneyDB, and you want something's interesting, you want to come back and look at it later, you can say add to my bin, and it'll save it in the bin. And things are going really slow. There we go. So let's go over here. So yeah, so these are just examples of some interesting IPs that I've saved in the bin, and it also keeps tracking of the session information, and you can add notes and whatnot. So yeah, so also in status of the honeypot, so that's new, so you can see the status there. Cool. So yeah, so what's next with HoneyDB? I want to put more graphs out there on the Twitter information so you can visualize that a little better, and then adding more API endpoints, just different ways to pull down the data, or types of data to pull down, and then more integrations with other threat intel info. Yeah, actually, that reminds me, I skipped over something. It's not going to go fast. Yeah, the other thing I forgot to mention on this detail page, obviously you can see the session information, but I also have API calls into Shodan, so if you want to see what Shodan has on that particular IP, so you don't have to nmap it or anything like that, you can see, hey, Shodan saw these ports open on that before. There's also a call to the project Honeypot, which is more focused on identifying IPs associated with spam. But there's also Threat Crowd. This is not a good example, but Threat Crowd aggregates like hash information and reverse DNS, so you can see what domains are on that IP as well. So there's more cool things that can be added there as well, just to help provide more information. All right, so then there's this. This is something I've been working on, and I'm kind of like just releasing it now. So honeypots as a service. And I'm actually going to make this available now, as long as I don't screw it up. Yeah. All right, so if I reload this, all right, so now we now have this little satellite here. So this is what honeypots as a service, or HoneyPy deploy. So what I'm doing here is, it's a couple things, but partly because, like I said, I'm using a really crappy hosting provider because, storing all this data, this hosting provider just happens to be really cheap. But as this is growing, more people are hitting it, collecting more data, it's not very reliable. So either I got to fork out several hundreds of dollars a month just for this personal project, or I need to come up with a way to raise some funding for it. So what I'm doing here is really a way to raise some funding, but also just to see, if people are interested in it, right? Because if nobody wants to do this or, support the project, then, maybe I don't need reliable infrastructure. But basically what it is, honeypots as a service. So you can come in here and you can request credits and, the fee associated with that to support the project. And then you can basically run and deploy honeypots across various regions. So basically you would come in, just give your honeypot a name, select a region, so let's say Bangalore. Actually, let's go to Amsterdam. Amsterdam would be funner. And click create. So basically this actually takes probably about a minute because it's actually standing up an image and deploying the configuration out into a data center in Amsterdam. So it's pretty much that easy. So instead of having to figure out where, getting your own server, installing all the software dependencies and, doing the configuration, if you just want to start collecting some, honeypot information on your own, this would be a nice, easy way to do it. Yes, it will take a little while. So do people think that's interesting? Okay, cool. I guess while we're waiting for this, so I asked a question earlier, how many people run honeypots, and not a lot of hands went up. Now, is this something you think you'd be interested in, running a honeypot, whether not honeypot as a service, but on your own or in production? Yeah, you really can get a lot of value out of it. And the thing about it is they're really low cost, low maintenance to deploy. You literally can just run a service. So there it created the service there, or the honeypot there. So you can start, stop, restart, delete it. And the configuration, this will take a second to open, but it's really just the config files, for HoneyPy. So you just modify whatever loggers you want to enable and API keys, and then the services you want to run. And then you just go ahead and deploy it, and it does it for you. Cool, so that's that. Oh, that was my demo slide. So if you want more information on honeypots, I have a blog series where I go in detail about how to set up HoneyPy, and it goes through all that. And then there's a couple of good books here that I definitely recommend that, they're kind of old, but they're still relevant and still good. And there's also the HoneyNet project to check out there. Oh yeah, so more help. I've been trying to get more followers than my honeypot, and I have not been successful, so if you would follow me, I can finally catch up with my honeypot, so that would be helpful. Cool, any questions? Yes? What's that? Oh, it's at HoneyPy log. Cool. Cool, any other questions? Yes? No, I'm not worried about that. Yes? Yeah, actually, I run it on a Raspberry Pi at home, and it's fine. I mean, it doesn't really require much. I mean, because it's low to medium interaction, so it's just requests going back and forth and not really doing a whole lot. No, I haven't seen that yet. I'm certainly conscious of that. The nice thing about that is, if these are just hosts out in the cloud, if that happens, I just, destroy them, recreate them. I mean, I have seen some, just through looking at logs, where I had bugs and saw some crashes and some things that just weren't, so I figured out what those were to fix that. So, but yeah, there's always, the risk of that, and that's why you have those different tiers of honeypots, low, medium, high. To try to reduce that risk, you just run the low honeypots. Yes? Not very good ones, I would say. It's more or less just like, oh, it's not responding now or something like that, so I'll go in and try to look at the logs and just see what happened, and see if I see any indicators of anything like that. So. And recently, I've just been like destroying them and recreating them. Cool. Yeah. No, I haven't, but that is a good strategy to do that. And that HoneyPy as a service thing just makes it easier, because the honeypots I'm running now, I manually configure those and build those. But now with this service thing, I just click a button, it creates it. I can update the config and deploy it or delete it, whatever. So, cool. Any more questions? Yeah. Right. Yeah, you could. Yeah, exactly. Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that guy I referred to, Andrew, he's actually starting to do some things like that. Yeah. So, cool. All right, well, happy honeypotting. I hope you guys like that.